Shalom and welcome to Boots on the Ground Live. I'm Yair Pinto, and besides me is my colleague and dear friend Mati Shoshani, TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst. Today's report centers on the dramatic release of 4 young Israeli hostages who had been held captive in Gaza for 15 months. These 4 are the female IDF spotters abducted from the Nahal Oz military base on that chilling morning of October 7, 2023. These soldiers symbolized the nation's anguish, taken in the midst of routine service, used as human bargaining chips, and rarely heard from except through sporadic Hamas propaganda videos. Now, today, they've been freed and are back in Israeli hands, but the story doesn't end there. Another spotter from the same base remains in captivity. Families rejoice for those who have returned, even while praying for those still missing. We'll delve into everything we know about the release operation, the final moments of captivity, the emotional reunions, the evolving humanitarian landscape in Gaza, and the IDF's ongoing fight against Hamas's entrenched infrastructure. We'll also look at how the families have reacted, what the medical teams are saying, and what we can expect in the coming days. Before we go deeper, let me remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click that notification bell so you'll never miss another report. If you believe in our mission of bringing unfiltered, on-the-ground perspectives from Israel, share this broadcast with your friends and family. It's crucial that people around the world understand what's truly going on in this war, in this region, Israel and the Middle East. And now, Mati, I'd like to bring you in. Today's events are monumental. The news cycle here in Israel is buzzing with coverage of these 4 young women finally emerging from captivity. Can you give us a quick snapshot of what we know?
Yes, thank you, Yair. Today's developments indeed brought a sense of relief to so many Israeli households. We saw a high-stakes process negotiated through various intermediaries, culminating in the handover of 4 IDF spotters who were abducted in one of the war's earliest and most shocking incidents. Their names have been on Israelis' lips for months: Liri Albag, Neama Levi, Karina Arayev, and Daniela Gilboa. All 4 are now safe with their families, albeit bearing the scars, both the visible ones and the invisible ones, of prolonged captivity. Tragically, of course, their fellow spotter, Agam Berger, was not included in this release. Sources are saying that she's held by a separate faction within Gaza, and that leaves her, along with many other Israeli hostages, still behind enemy lines. We'll break down these complicated realities and what it all means for Israel's immediate security posture and for the families waiting at home.
Absolutely. And friends, we have extensive material to share, so stay with us as we piece together the timeline of this release and what it reveals about Hamas's strategies, ongoing IDF operations, and the families' emotional journeys. Let's get started. To understand why today's release is such big news, we need to rewind to the day it all began, on October 7th, the morning Hamas launched its unprecedented attack on southern Israel. Most viewers remember the sheer shock of that day. Hamas operatives infiltrated Israeli territory in large numbers, attacking civilian communities and IDF installations alike. One of those installations was the Nahal Oz, an IDF outpost near the Gaza border, largely staffed by young spotters fresh out of training.
Это что, с 7-го типа?
Were the 5 soldiers who'd become widely known to the Israeli public. Liri Elbag, 19 years of age, from Kfar Yedidia. Neama Levi, 20 years of age, from Ra'anana, Karina Arayev, 20 years of age, from Jerusalem, and Daniela Gilboa, 20 years of age, from Petah Tikva. And the fifth one, Agam Berger, 20 years of age, from Hulon. The fateful morning, Hamas broke through Nahal Oz's defenses. Some of the spotters were sleeping when the base was overrun. Others were on shift scanning the border. Within minutes, they were forcibly taken into the Gaza Strip, abducted by Hamas militants who saw them as valuable hostages.
Можешь дальше переключить?
To contain the infiltration, but Hamas
Дальше
had the
переключить, типа, чуть-чуть.
and the surprise. Families of these young women exchanged frantic messages with them, which abruptly stopped. Photos leaked on social media showed at least one soldier with obvious injuries being dragged into a vehicle. Since then, the Israeli public has followed these spotters, plied with bated breath. For months, little was confirmed except for propaganda clips trickling out of Gaza. And now, at least 4 of them are free. Mati, from a strategic standpoint, how did this abduction shape Israel's national mood at the outset of this war?
Well, Yair, this had a very profound effect. It's hard to overstate how important it was. IDF spotters have a unique status in Israel. They're often highlighted for their vigilance and responsibility at the front lines, and seeing them overpowered so swiftly rattled Israelis. The sense was, if our border watches, professionally trained on duty, could be taken, who's truly safe? And those early images of these young women in captivity conditions, especially in this era of instant social media, cut deeply into Israel's morale. There was also a psychological dimension for Hamas. Kidnapping IDF personnel has always been a high-value objective for the organization, especially female soldiers, because it exerts massive emotional pressure on Israeli society and leadership.
Liri, Naama, Karin, and Daniela. The timing was sudden. Announcements began circulating early this morning that negotiations were nearing completion. By midday, the Red Cross was seen preparing vehicles at a crossing point along the Gaza perimeter fence. Initial pictures showed masked militants escorting 4 women, heads covered, some wearing mismatched civilian clothes, others wearing partial IDF uniforms, and they were moved into a waiting ambulance from the International Cross. Provision. After that, a short helicopter flight took them to Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba. Some accounts say they were then transferred to another hospital in terms of their conditions. But it seems like they are doing well physically. Footage from the hospital's arrival area captured the moment that they stepped off the helicopter. While obviously exhausted and stressed, they stood on their own feet. White coats from the medical teams quickly surrounded them. We could see tears of relief among IDF officers, medics, and even the freed hostages themselves. 2 of the spotters spontaneously embraced each other as if only now realizing they had truly made it out. Mati, can you fill in what the IDF or Israeli authorities have said about this release operation? Was it purely a humanitarian gesture from Hamas or part of a negotiated agreement?
I think that's a great question. It's certainly not purely humanitarian goodwill on the Hamas's accord. Everything indicates this was part of a larger negotiated exchange brokered through multiple intermediaries, notably Qatar and Egypt. And in essence, Hamas has a track record. They never release Israeli hostages without extracting some kind of strategic or political benefit. And while official Israeli statements are guarded, there's mention of reciprocal steps, possibly a temporary ceasefire extension, perhaps the release of additional Palestinian detainees. or further concessions regarding aid flow into the Gaza Strip. Now, according to the Security Cabinet, the arrangement was hammered out in a series of intense, last-minute sessions. High-level IDF intelligence officers, along with Shin Bet counterparts, our version of the FBI, verified that 4 spotters were indeed in Hamas custody, not a splinter group, not a different group, and that any breakaway factions holding other captives remain outside these direct negotiations. So yes, it's a negotiated arrangement, overshadowed by the fact that one of the 5, Agam Berger, did not come out. Now, Hamas claims she's held by a separate faction. This complicates the overall hostage picture, but for the families of the 4 freed young women, it's an indescribable relief.
Yeah, definitely, Mati. I can't imagine. And every week, the entire nation is together with these families and with these hostages that are being released
Yes.
back into Israel.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what happened once these 4 reached the Israeli soil. Viewers worldwide have seen glimpses of the emotional reunions at the hospital. Parents, siblings, close friends, and IDF officials lined the hospital corridor in anticipation. Israel's media broadcast the raw, heart-wrenching images of mothers hugging daughters, tears streaming down cheeks, and trembling voices asking, "Are you all right?" It's a moment that underscores the personal side of a conflict, often measured in statistics. The medical staff indicated that while the 4 are under enormous stress and exhaustion, none are in life-threatening condition. They do, however, show bruises, old wounds, and mental scars indicative of rough treatment during captivity. Psychological evaluations will follow, ensuring these soldiers get comprehensive support to address any post-traumatic stress, anxiety, or depression. That heartbreak resonates widely in a small country like Israel, where the notion of not leaving any soldier behind is ingrained in the national physique. You can sense the tension. Families rejoice, but the entire country also wonders, what was the cost of this? Will it hamper the IDF's operations? And what about everyone else left behind? Mati, let's have a quick open talk. In your opinion, what are the immediate implications for the IDF? Are they slowing down ground operation because of the release, or forging ahead?
Yes, it's all very, very complicated. So I'll try to break this down. One, the IDF has not stopped being the very powerful and very meaningful fighting machine that it's turned into in the last, 13, 14 months in the Gaza Strip. More so, and we'll get to this later on in this broadcast, what's happened in the Gaza Strip today, and we said this in vague terms, I'll specify what we're trying to say here. Hamas violated the agreement today, and that's something that people need to understand. They were supposed to release a different hostage, and they chose to release other ones, and there's a whole slew of agenda behind this, because we give them back Palestinian prisoners in a sort of a relationship to the identity of the person that they're releasing. More so, there's a long-term plan here in the way it was staggered and built up by the IDF. So the IDF started out today, and we'll get to this later on, by pausing the permission for Gazans to return back to the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And 2, if you look at the footage from today's show, something is very clear in there. You look at and I say the word show intentionally, you look at the footage that's playing right now on the street. Hamas orchestrated this very, very elaborate show to try to say a couple things. One, we're morally equivalent to the Israeli army. We're not just releasing the hostages, but we're also pardoning them. I don't know if people caught that in the broadcast when it came out. As if they're saying these were women who committed, or soldiers who committed a crime, and we're pardoning them in the same way the Israelis, and in the same way that the Israelis are pardoning the Hamas terrorists who are being released out of prisons. Of course, there is no moral equivalence between the two. One are young, innocent soldiers who are doing something legally sanctioned by the state, and the others are, of course, violent terrorists. So the IDF is not stopping the war. We have a ceasefire, and we are abiding by the agreement as it is agreed on by the State of Israel and, of course, by Hamas and others. But that doesn't mean the war is over. And more so, I think something important to note is that for this infraction today of the agreement, this isn't the first one, but it's the first substantial one on the behalf of Hamas, the IDF immediately responded with saying, you violated the agreement, we're not going to move on with business as usual, we now are not going to uphold what you were expecting us to do, so beware, be careful, be aware of the fact that we are going to hold you to the letter of this agreement. And for us, I think that's a good sign, Yair, because it means that we're maintaining the pressure on these girls, on the Hamas to get back our women, our men, our elderly, the children who are still held in Hamas captivity.
Yeah, definitely, Mati. And it looks like that every week will be a struggle to make sure that this agreement is fully implemented by the side of Hamas, that they're trying to push and force this country into a psychological warfare. And they are using this advantage that they have to the maximum. And from a diplomatic standpoint, does this hamper or advance broader negotiations, Mati?
I don't think it makes much of a difference. I think that's where it's really interesting today. Is it seems almost like you could say Israel accused Hamas of sort of blowing up this phase of the agreement. Hamas will obviously say about Israel changing sort of the rules in retrospect, saying, well, of course you didn't uphold your part of the deal, which isn't true. But in reality, both sides were testing each other. Hamas, and they always do this, are a terrorist organization. They use deceit and they use manipulation to promote their agenda. They always have, they always will, and we can continue to expect them to do that. But part of that is testing to see, look, they were supposed to provide a very specific list of people with a very specific characteristic, and there's a reason for it. There's reasons that have to do with international law. There's reasons that have to do with Israel's long-term plan. There's a reason. And Hamas violated their part of the agreement, and when they did that, they wanted to see what Israel would do, what the army would do, and what the government would do. And we responded the right way. We said, you violated the agreement, and we now are going to act accordingly, according to what the agreement states. You didn't give us what we were supposed to get, so you're not getting what you were supposed to get. And they're going to look at that, and they're going to say, we get it. This is what's happening. And they'll probably adjust their behavior. I'm not the only one who thinks this. We've been talking about this throughout the day. They're going to adjust their behavior. They're going to give us what they committed to in the agreement to the extent that they can, and they will tell the truth to the extent that we can force them to do so moving on.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll track this process closely every week, every day now, until the remaining of our hostages get back home. All right, let's switch angles and look at Hamas's propaganda side, which is a very, very big issue in this war. I mean, there's the physical war, and there is the war for people's mind and the psychological warfare against the people of Israel. So throughout this war, Hamas has tried to project an image of strength, even as it faces extensive losses on the ground. Israeli airstrikes and ground incursions have dismantled significant portions of Hamas's tunnel networks, command centers, and rocket launch capabilities. But in classic fashion, Hamas parades any hostage exchange or any IDF concession as proof of its victory. Just days ago, Hamas staged a public display in Gaza City's central square with masked militants brandishing rifles, chanting, "They'll force Israel into compliance by capturing soldiers." They claim that the infiltration on October 7th was a monumental success, overshadowing the devastation that's befallen on Gaza. Now that 4 hostages have been released in exchange for a sort of pause or possibly other Israeli concessions, Hamas tries to paint it as an Israeli retreat. Yet, we know the raw data suggests that Hamas is severely degraded and damaged. Thousands of their fighters have been terminated, and large swaths of infrastructure collapsed. Mati, how do you see the propaganda narrative colliding with these stark realities?
That is a great question, Yair, and I love the point that you make. about the fact that Hamas have always and always will continue to use propaganda and twisted reality to try to further their goal. So here are the facts. Hamas's narrative operates on two distinct levels. First, the internal one, to maintain local support. Then the second one is the external one, aimed at global audiences. Internally, they reassure the Gaza residents, saying the following idea: despite the bombings, we hold the upper hand. Look at our success capturing and releasing Israelis on our terms. This can boost morale among loyalists and deflect blame for the catastrophic damage that the Gaza Strip has sustained during this war. So let's talk about something else that I think is really important to engage on. Think about how this video footage looked like. And if you're joining us just right now, we have the footage playing on the screen throughout this video broadcast. And what you'll see in it is Hamas propping up these girls in a very staged event earlier today. And they were expecting, I believe, to see a moment of humiliation, to see the girls subdued, to see the girls weakened. Again, we're at, 477 days, Yair? Instead, we see a moment of bravery, a moment of strength by these young women that I think everyone in Israel and around the world who saw the footage of was deeply impressed with.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one of the best moments of this war. This, alongside the positive attitudes from the released hostages of last week. It's amazing to see that despite everything, I mean, there's still hope. They're happy. They're happy to see their loved ones, and they want to live. It's really, the difference between us and this terrorist organization, Hamas. We want to live.
One more funny thing is Hamas are saying we won, and yet no one in that parade or no one on that stage had their face revealed. Everyone has a face mask on. And the reason they have a face mask on is they are anticipating and fearing Israeli retaliation towards the people that, and let's call them what they are, towards the terrorists who are involved in this moment here in time. So just to show you if what appearances is what they were looking for, they lost in the appearance game. The young women who spent months, over a year in captivity, appear to be strong, appear to be brave, stand up straight with their head held high, and the terrorists are still hiding behind their masks. And I think that tells everything you need to know in one single clip.
Yeah, and definitely they should hide their faces, because the IDF is still, hunting terrorist leaders all across the world. If it's in Gaza, Hamas terrorists, or in Yemen, the Houthis, and other places. And of course, the war continues. Gazan humanitarian situation is very dire, and this is another big issue that I want to talk about. Entire neighborhoods in the north of the Gaza Strip are basically rubble. More than millions are displaced. Water and electricity are inconsistent at best. Aid convoys crossing from Egypt and Israel daily, carrying vital supplies. Israel's official position is that they allow shipments to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, but they worry about Hamas diverting resources to rebuild or rearm, which they do. This complicated environment shapes, and the question is, what's next? Will Hamas try to leverage the release of more hostages in exchange for more ceasefires or relief concessions? Will the IDF pivot from full-scale offensives to more targeted operations? Mati, from your vantage point, do you think the freed four represent a turning point in this conflict, or is it just one step in a very long war of attrition?
Well, there's the logical answer, there's the hopeful answer. On the hopeful side, I hope we've seen a turning point. I hope that we see the hostages released till the very last one of them, as does everyone else in the state of Israel. There's absolutely no question about that. I think people around the world are praying, they're crossing their fingers, whatever they do, in anticipation of that happening. But in reality, when you look at this, it's another step in a treaty, in a ceasefire agreement between two very mistrusting entities. Israelis are very happy to see this phase of the war come to an end. People are hopeful, people are elated, is the word that comes to mind. They're sensing this feeling of incredible joy over the fact that the hostages are finally being released and sent home. But these aren't all the hostages. Phase
Yeah.
one of this agreement, which plays out for over 40 days, phase one only brings us to, a small portion of the hostages, about a third of the hostages in total. So it's not enough. It's a good start for it, but it's not enough. And another thing is the situation on the ground between the IDF and Hamas may be a ceasefire situation, but we're still very much at war, and that's
Yeah.
important to note. The army has not gone home. We're not expecting people to dramatically change in their attitude on the Hamas side overnight. If anything, now that we're in the new Trump administration, you could look and say that there's a good chance that this will further push or promote a stronger deal that then could be the real turning point in this event. I don't know. What do you think, Yair?
Yeah, well, first of all, I completely agree that the war is still ongoing, and Hamas is not going to be a peaceful organization just now after fighting us for all this time. Their only claim to existence and to controlling the Gaza Strip, and especially the Palestinian people, is strength or the projection of strength. Okay, so that's what they're going to do. They're going to threaten Israel. They're going to try and carry out additional terrorist attacks. So not from Gaza at this moment, but from Judea and Samaria. Hamas
Yes.
is still very popular and has weapons, militants, and funding and influence in Judea and Samaria. And that's the next front that we are battling. And the IDF is moving its forces from South Lebanon, from the Gaza Strip, from other locations in Israel into Judea and Samaria to battle the attempts of Hamas to carry out another intifada, which is a popular terrorist uprising against the people of Israel, where there are no clear borders or fences between the Israelis and the Palestinians in the area of Judea and Samaria. And it's also very, very close to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. So this is the situation with Hamas. And it's not over. I just hope that we get as many hostages back home as possible, before the ceasefire will collapse, which it will sadly stage or the next, because I don't see Hamas abiding by the full terms of this agreement. And Mati, I know that a lot of our viewers are asking, what about the fifth spotter? There was another spotter that Hamas was supposed to release, and now they're claiming that a separate faction, meaning a separate terrorist entity in Gaza Strip, has her. We hear about these extremist subgroups operating in Gaza, some with different aims. How complicated does that make future negotiations? Can we really trust them to deliver our hostages back? Do they even know where they are?
It's incredibly complicated. I think the short answer is no. You can never trust Hamas. They're a terrorist organization. Their religious beliefs state that they're allowed to lie and deceive. So yes, it's very complicated. And Hamas historically has tried to keep a very tight grip on the hostages it has it's in control. But in the chaos of post-October 7th, 2023, we have multiple jihadist cells, possibly including several other streams within Islam or ISIS-inspired elements that too were involved in holding them. And if those do have agam, they might demand a different or more extreme terms. They might be less motivated by typical ransom or prisoner swaps, and they might be driven by ideological fervor or desire to build power and go back into a confrontation. But I'll say this, do we really need to believe Hamas and what they're saying? I'd say no. Hamas are presenting themselves as the people that have power, the people that have the control and the information. If they do, they need to present the hostages that they committed to deliver. That's as simple as it gets.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree completely. Do you have any sense of her condition? Are there any reports of her whereabouts? Has Hamas even shown proof of life?
Not to our knowledge, and I'm going to put a caveat and an asterisk on what I'm saying right now, which is what we know is what the public knows on these things. And we know in relation to several other hostages that there has been information that reached the hands of or the families or intelligence organizations that didn't make it into the public for obvious reasons. So as far as we know and as far as what's been made public, there is no sign of life that's been given from her. And you can only imagine how the family feels. It is agonizing. It's heartbreaking. They're seeing these other young women being released, and they still are waiting and praying and hoping, hope against hope, to see their daughter. released. And the IDF, by the way, is not resting on this topic. They've been using everything in their hand to get some kind of piece of information on the topic. But so far as we know, right now as we're live, we have no further information on the topic.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll keep you updated, guys, as always. And if you're just joining us, this is Boots on the Ground from TBN Israel. And we report on the major headline of the day, the release of 4 female IDF spotters abducted on October 7th of 2023. They're finally freed, reunited with their families, and undergoing medical evaluations. But not everyone is back. Hostages remain in Gaza, and the war is far from over. So if you want to keep receiving these first-hand updates, subscribe to our YouTube channel and share this broadcast. We want the world to understand the realities on the ground, not the propaganda, not the rumors, but actual verified information. Also, if you feel called to support our work, please go to our website at tbnisrael.com/give or click that donation button on YouTube. Every donation helps us continue delivering unfiltered, on-site reporting. Thank you for being with us throughout this war. And now let's zoom in on how the IDF is handling the transition from all-out combat to these brief ceasefires. It's very complicated, Mati.
Yes, so let's try to break this down for people who are with us today. So since the war began, the IDF has pursued a dual approach: intense airstrikes and ground maneuvers to crush the Hamas organization's capabilities, and balance that with efforts to negotiate for hostages. Over the past month, Israel's ground presence in northern Gaza has been significant, dismantling rocket labs and caving in tunnels. And now, with a short ceasefire to allow hostage release, the IDF must ensure Hamas doesn't exploit this pause to reposition or rearm its forces. So look at these areas along the northern perimeter. Previous Hamas strongholds, like Bet Hanun or the neighborhoods in Gaza City, Israel has inflicted serious damage. But each pause in fighting is a chance for Hamas to regroup. And that's why the IDF remains poised to resume operations at a moment's notice. We see IDF divisions rotating, providing rest for some frontline units with fresh units that are standing by. And you might consider it a strategy of hit hard and then watch and wait carefully. So if Hamas breaks the ceasefire or uses it to attack, the IDF is of course ready to respond immediately.
So in effect, the IDF is walking a very fine line here. So maintaining momentum against Hamas while presenting an opening for more hostage releases. It's a very thin line, but every day that yields a freed hostage is a day that the Israeli government deems necessary, and the people of Israel are also waiting for that. It's one of the goals of this war. The question remains, how long can these partial truces last if Hamas tries to manipulate them for advantage against Israel?
Yeah, it's a very impossible equation. I was trying to explain this to my kids the other day. You know,
very tough to explain to the kids. I know.
Well, my kids are a little older than yours, but still, it's very hard to explain because there are no right answers. There are only wrong answers. We know the nature of the Hamas terrorist organization. They are and will be who they've always been. They've been terrorists. They're deceitful. They're hateful. They're violent. They're not going to change anytime soon. And at the same time, we want to get our hostages back. They're going to manipulate. They're going to lie. They're going to deceive. We need to be shrewd. We need to be conniving. We need to be smart. We need to outwit them again and again, as much as is needed until we get all the hostages back. And we've done so many, many times successfully. Let's look at what's happened in this last, in this last war, Yair. It's been incredible on the side of surprising Hamas, surprising Hezbollah. So I don't doubt our armed forces. I don't doubt our intelligence organizations. We need to maintain in our minds the fact that the Hamas is the evil organization that it always has been. I think the most important piece is for the people, the population. The IDF knows how to fight. It's for the civilians to have the fortitude and the perseverance and the patience to wait this out, not to lose hope, not to stop praying, not to stop believing that God will come through that our nation will come through in exchanging the hostages, bringing them back, and ending this war.
Yeah, definitely, Mati. And as we move forward, we know that negotiations for more hostage releases could continue. Hamas and other factions have different demands. Israel wants all the hostages back, of course, but it also wants to prevent Hamas from reemerging as a potent threat against Israel. Meanwhile, diplomatic talks mediated by Qatar, by Egypt, and possibly other regional players might come into play at the same time that we're dealing with everything here. So military analysts suggest that the IDF is prepared for a prolonged presence in Gaza until it's sure that Hamas can't regroup. At the same time, the global community is urging an end to violence, citing humanitarian concerns. It's a tightrope to walk in this situation, Mati.
Absolutely. It absolutely is, but I believe we can and we have the ability to do so. And I add just one more thing to what you're saying, Yair. Hamas has been dealt a very, very strong blow by the IDF. There is no two ways about this. They have been hit harder than they have ever been in our lifetimes. And it's going to take them a very long time to recover. They've lost their commanders. They've lost much of their weapons, much of the infrastructure, much of the tunnels, much of the weaponry, much of the rockets, much of their command has been annihilated during this war. So to say they're just going to regroup is not going to happen. They want to present a semblance of it happening, but it's going to take a long time for them to get anywhere near where they were on the day of October 7th, 2023.
Yes, definitely. But that's why it's so important for them to receive these terrorists back from
Yes.
Israeli prisons, so they can, refill the ranks of the top leadership of Hamas. Because, finding 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds in the Gaza Strip, we see that they've been doing that, and they give these kids food. They give them food for their families in exchange for being fighters in this terrorist group, and in exchange for carrying out terrorist attacks against Israel. And what they're lacking is experienced leadership. And sadly, that's what they're getting with this deal. So that's the downside and the fear on the Israeli side of this deal. And guys, we invite you to join us in prayer tonight. It feels more vital than ever. We've seen 4 families experience unimaginable relief. But we also remember the last hostage, together with all the other hostages that were not released today. They're still trapped in Gaza, in a tunnel somewhere, surrounded by darkness and terrorists. We remember, all the IDF soldiers that are risking their lives every day, the wounded ones, those living under constant threat on the home front, the citizens of Israel close to the borders or in the heart of the country. We're talking about Judea and Samaria. Before we pray, guys, if you haven't subscribed to this channel and want to know the truth about Israel, please click that like button, share this video on your social media networks, and encourage your communities to watch. We post daily updates and videos from Israel by us, Mati, and myself. So let's make sure that the real story reaches every corner of the globe. And if you feel called to stand with us financially, please go to tbnisrael.com/give or click that donate button on YouTube to make a contribution of any size. It helps us create more content.
That's right.
Thank you
Yes. Let's remember this one last thing. No matter how complex the negotiations or how violent the battlefield, each life matters. These 4 spotters returning to Israel show that hope can emerge, even amidst the tragedy. And yet we press on for those still missing. May we see them soon reunited with their loved ones.
So we ask you to pray for these newly freed hostages, that they find physical and emotional healing. They really need it. Pray for the families that are still waiting night after night for any shred of news and hope about their loved ones. Pray for Israel's defense forces as they navigate a moral and operational minefield. And as always, stay here on Boots on the Ground and unite with us in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem.